Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is George Rain. I'm a partner at Ropes & Gray, and we're very glad to be here and honored to be able to welcome you and sponsor this lovely lunch. Ropes has a proud and long time sponsorship of the IAA, including having had as one of our own David Titsworth, the former president of IAA. May he rest in peace. I guess it's also just great to be in this environment which sort of brings together all sorts of new words that I learned by reading a speech yesterday, and I can refer to this as a frisson of those with the punctilio of an honor the most sensitive. So welcome to you, punctiliates. And also in line with that, I think we decided that our lunch would be themed based on the characteristics of our time, namely fracture and chaos. So we hope that you enjoyed your chaos salad and your fracture roast salmon. With that, and absolutely no substance, I get to introduce Karen Barr, the CEO and president of the IAA. Enjoy dessert. I haven't named it yet, so come on.
Thank you, George, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to Ropes & Gray for sponsoring this lunch. We really appreciate it, and it is a wonderful, if not chaotic lunch. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel today. I'm joined here by three policy experts who will help me unpack what is going on. My colleague, Neil Simon, Vice President of Government Relations. He has his finger on the pulse on Capitol Hill, and you hopefully have all met him at these conferences and at various advocacy days that we hold on Capitol Hill. You'll be hearing more about that. Rana Wright. Rana is CAO and General Counsel of Harris Associates and Principal Executive Officer and President of the Oakmark Funds. Among all of her responsibilities and titles, I can add that she is the chair of our Legal and Regulatory Committee and on the IAA Board of Governors. So just a few things going on for Rana. And to her left is Langston Emerson, a partner at Mindset DC, a bipartisan policy shop. He's a policy strategist and advocate with strong experience in financial services. Langston began his career in policy work on Capitol Hill, holding senior positions in the House and Senate, and was previously in private practice, and at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So we have experts here to help us unpack what's going on. We will be taking questions, so there should be cards on your table, and people will be coming around to collect them. We are here to help you digest your lunch and everything that has gone on throughout this conference and what is going on Capitol Hill and at the various regulators. I refer to this panel as the cleanup crew. We are here to cover, in addition to the regular topics that came up since we planned the panels at the conference a couple of months ago. A few things have happened since then that we didn't and were not able to plan for. So we have a lot of cleanup to do. A lot has happened. So we're going to start on Capitol Hill, and I'm going to talk about retirement issues. Retirement issues are very important to your businesses and your clients. There's a lot of legislative activity happening there right now, particularly with a bill called Secure Act 2.0. And so, Langston, why don't we start with you? What is Secure Act 2.0? Was there a 1.0? What is the status of it?
That's a good question. There was a Secure kind of 1.0, if you will, that was an iteration of the Secure Act 2.0, broad-based, bipartisan, to a large degree, retirement package. And that there's been a lot of interest, not only from this type of community, but also a lot of different industry groups that are relevant to the retirement and investment space. So we have been working quite a bit, along with Neil and others, to see passage of Secure 2.0 because of the bipartisan nature of the bill in the 1.0 and 2.0, but some little issues, I would say, that haven't necessarily led to full passage and signed by the president. This has been a real push this year to get it done, simply because there are a few members who have been leading efforts, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side, that are leaving Congress, retiring and moving on, and this is a legacy item for them. And there's a real desire from the leadership in both the House and the Senate to move this legislation forward. So there is a lot of optimism about it moving forward, particularly in the House and Senate, but there's still some issues that need to be reconciled between the two Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate. So while we expect there to be some passage later on this year, that is something that's still TBD as far as exact date and movement because of some issues that need to be reconciled. But if there wasn't time where there was this type of legislation would move forward in the retirement space, this is the year.
And Neil, what have we been working on with respect to Secure Act 2.0 retirement issues at the IAA?
Sure. So as Langston indicated, there's bipartisan consensus that more needs to be done in the area of retirement savings. The Secure Act 1.0 was passed in December 2019, and frankly, there was an expectation that Congress would pass a 2.0 some time ago, but it hasn't happened. In the House, as was mentioned, it came out of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee in the House. Chair Richie Neal from Massachusetts and the ranking Republican Kevin Brady from Texas. Brady is retiring. Brady and Neal have a strong relationship. This is a committee that there is a history of bipartisanship. And as Langston mentioned, I think there really is some inclination to pass the bill just to help Kevin Brady's legacy. This is how legislation is sometimes made. In any case, in 2.0, there are quite a few provisions. The legislation is not in final shape, but it got through the Ways and Means Committee unanimously. There were 91 co-sponsors. In the Senate, we just heard that the Senate Finance Committee, Grassley, is going to be taking up this legislation likely around Easter. Meanwhile, I heard this morning, and I discussed it with Langston at lunch, that Richie Neal and Kevin Brady are going to try to slide this bill into the big omnibus bill that has to be passed by March 11th. March 11th, folks, government funding runs out. And in fact, they're going to have to pass it by March 9th, really, because the Senate Dems and Republicans are each going off on a retreat, separate retreats, on March 9th. So stay tuned. This could be interesting. In any case, to answer your question, Karen, I'll get there. Just some things in Secure Act 2.0. Increase the RMD age for required distributions from 72 to 75. Allow CITs to be offered in 403B plans, increase the annual catch-up amounts for qualified retirement plans, although those catch-up amounts would have to go in Roth IRAs. That is how they're going to pay for this thing, by moving money toward Roth. Allow 403B plans to sponsor or participate in pooled employer plans. And I should add, there's also a provision in there that plans will be required to provide a paper benefit statement one time a year unless the participant opts out. So there's lots of stuff in there that is going to affect you and your firms. So be sure that we're going to have our hand in there, and I'll be working with Langston on this stuff.
Turning to another piece of legislation that got a lot of attention, the Build Back Better Act. Neil, the IAA engaged with previous versions of the Build Back Better Act. What were the issues that we engaged on, and what were members concerned about?
So the Build Back Better Act, you may recall, lots of fanfare. It got considerably whittled down, about halved in size. There were some provisions in that original bill that were mighty troubling. There was an auto-enrollment provision. Auto-enrollment, it's fine. Let's bring more people into the system. But unless the participant opted for some default investment options, the options were going to be severely limited. In fact, Treasury, by regulation, would have been authorized to declare which investments were appropriate. So notwithstanding that you all are fiduciaries, some folks at Treasury were going to make a decision and take away your discretion in terms of investment decisions. That provision, with your help, was knocked out of the bill. We issued a take action now a message asking members to contact Congress. We had a good response. The next time I send a take action now, I hope you all participate and we have an even stronger response. But that bill was knocked out. There was another provision in there which would have radically changed the tax treatment of ETFs and really destroyed the ETF industry. That was also out. But mind you, I'll defer to Langston on this. The Build Back Better Act doesn't look like it has any life left in it. I think Joe Manchin has pretty effectively killed it. If it does reemerge, I expect it to be a small bill, maybe focused on child care tax credits or some such.
So Langston, what's your view? Is the Build Back Better Act dead?
Don't make me look bad, Langston.
I can't.
We can have friendly disagreement here.
It's dead as it's been known to be, and I think you're absolutely right. But I will say the likes of the White House, Senator Manchin, Sinema, names that become household names just simply because of their engagement on this bill and prior bills that were large infrastructure like bipartisan bills or partisan bills. They are having discussions. And to Neil's point, what you all had worked on, those provisions that were ultimately yanked out of the bill, from my understanding, if any smaller package that will likely come together by late spring to go to the president's desk is brought together, it's not to be inclusive of things that were yanked out prior to. So I say rest assured, but in DC it's skeptical when I have to say rest assured to some degree that as it stands now, what was fought for hard by the likes of you, Neil, and others is out completely. I will say that there's Manchin, who's pretty much an author-in-chief and as it relates to what is likely to come out, has made it very clear that he's interested in some of the climate provisions, but he also wants to pay for it, and kind of a deficit reduction is how the White House is now framing this package. He wants to look at increasing and putting back on the table issues around capital gains increase, corporate rate increase, as well as carried interest. And so those are issues that the likes of Senator Sinema has said are off the table. So that's where the rub is, and whether those two are able to reconcile issues will likely determine the fate of BBB. So, or what it is now known as smaller package, to your point, Neil. So I think we have to wait until later in the spring, but likelihood of something happening, I think, as a smaller subset of what was is in the president's best interest, which means it's going to be in the Democrats in Congress's best interest.
And by the way, since you get the sense there's going to be a lot of activity in the spring, our Advisor Advocacy Day is June 9th. Could be an exciting time to participate in your nation's democratic affairs.
Nicely done.
Langston, staying with you, there was a lot of talk about tax legislation. Is that dead? Is there any tax legislation in the works happening in the next couple of months?
I wouldn't say it's dead. There's still a likelihood of it. A lot of it hinges on what is likely to come from the revised version of BBB, and so, or Build Back Better. Because there's so many tax provisions within that package, Democrats, both in the House and Senate, as well as the White House, are not necessarily engaging on anything separate and distinct from that, if that is to pass. If it does not pass, and we probably will get a sense of that later in the spring, early summer, then there may be an opportunity, or there will be an interest, and I've heard this now from both House and Senate and the White House, to pull parts of the Build Back, what was Build Back Better, and insert them into maybe an end-of-the-year tax extenders package or something separate that will ride on or be attached to a broader kind of continuing resolution or omnibus package in order to facilitate some passage of what they would consider to be a particular campaign type of tax credits, energy-related in particular, climate, which is a big issue for the White House and the administration. So those type of issues I can easily see being attached to must-pass legislation if the revised version of Bill BBB is not passed.
And I might add, it was certainly telling that President Biden never mentioned the Build Back Better Act, at least by that name.
No, it's just you two.
During the State of the Union message. Two other little things on tax. One of the reasons I am a little skeptical, as I think is Langston, that the effort to attach the Secure Act to the omnibus appropriations bill is not going to succeed is leadership really does not want to add a tax title to that bill because it could create all sorts of mischief. There's a lot of pent-up demand to address expiring credits and all sorts of things. The other thing I would like to mention is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has a number of provisions that are expiring in 2025, which isn't that far away. And among those provisions is the one that completely redid itemized business deductions and eliminated the deductibility of advisory fees for your clients. Now, mind you, it was only deductible for certain strata of clients, but Congress is going to have to revisit that issue, and we have to be at the table. Another reason we have to build up our grassroots and our advocacy because we'd sure like to not only restore that provision, but expand it. I think it would be good, strong policy to incentivize taxpayers to use the services of fiduciaries in making their investment and retirement decisions.
Why don't we turn now to looking ahead? I know for some of you the midterms seem far away, but for folks here in Washington, they are not that far away. Neil, what can we expect on the midterm elections and the prospect of the House flipping?
I think, I think it's likely that the House is going to flip. It's not going to take many seats for that to happen. That will be a big change. Maxine Waters will no longer be chair of the House Financial Services Committee. The ranking Republican, it's not clear, Patrick McHenry from North Carolina, certainly could succeed her if he wants to. He could also move up into leadership ranks. But that will be an enormous change on that committee. That committee has been focusing on housing and underserved communities with a great deal of focus and intensity. But I think if the GOP is running the House, we're going to see much more focus on the capital markets, some of the issues near and dearer to us. And I think there will also be a lot of oversight and criticism of regulators. So I think it's going to be an enormous change if it happens.
Langston, from your perspective, what implications do the midterms have on investment advisors?
I think to Neil's point, I think there will likely be a bloodbath in the sense that I think that it's less about the House changing hands and power, but more about by how many. And I think there's a potential for the Senate as well. So I say all that to say that it makes, if that is the case, it makes real bipartisan legislation the only thing that gets to the president's desk. And partisan legislation, a lot of what would impact investment advisors, less likely. What it also means is you will likely see a lot, and you already are now, but you'll likely see a lot more activity on the administrative level, agencies, SEC and the like, being more aggressive than they have been, and they're pretty aggressive now, but more aggressive than they have been in order to facilitate some of the priorities that Congress hasn't done to the degree that they can unilaterally act, they being the agency. So you can expect a lot more activity to happen there, especially if the House and Senate flips.
Thank you, Langston. And just bringing it back up even one level from Congress to more of the coordinated approach across Congress and the agencies, what are some of the big regulatory themes that you're seeing across Congress and the agencies? Ronna, why don't we start with you?
So rephrase the question. Sorry, Karen.
Sorry,
because there's so much going on, I want to make sure I'm exactly pointed to because I'm like, oh, it's my turn now. Let's see where you want to start.
Right. Well, the big themes that we're seeing in Congress and across the agencies, right? The DOL, the SEC,
yes,
the CFTC.
For sure. So in that regard, I also want to start, before I start remarks, is just that we're at a compliance conference. Please enjoy your lunch. And when George was talking and I heard bloodbath, all these contexts were going on in my brain, like, we've got so much going on. Enjoy the nice light lunch, because you probably don't ever get to have lunch because there's so much going on.
And I might add, just to Ronna's disclaimer, she is not talking on behalf of the SEC Commission, any individual commissioner or staff.
At all, or on behalf of my company. But honestly, I see you compliance professionals. This is a lot. This is a time of unprecedented change, right? And I don't say that lightly. And so when we talk about some of these themes that are going on, I realize now we're pivoting to the regulatory docket. You're going to hear themes like transparency, efficiency in the capital markets, innovation. So there's all these macro contextual items going on that inform these rules, and that you have to be aware of that as you start to develop your policies and procedures. You have to be aware of that context as you start to build these programs. And it becomes incredibly important because we can just look at a rule, put our heads down and say, okay, rule, compliance date, policies, procedures, done, next, because there is so much coming out and more to come. I mean, you can see 5 rules in a week. There's more coming, right? And so that's really, though, it's the protection of the retail investor, innovation, technology, and compliance in particular sits at the center of that. Understanding the technology the business wants to use, understanding how the SEC can understand the technology, and then rules to kind of control technology that's evolving in real time. So I guess that's when we think about the kind of macro issues, it's a lot of those themes that we're seeing, especially in the retail investor. And then we can talk about particular rules if you like, but that's really the macro.
Langston, from your perspective?
There's a lot that Congress is attempting to get done that they will likely be unable to. And I think what you are going to see from a very high level is pressing and urging the SEC to focus more on climate disclosure, climate issues, human capital, and diversity and equity and inclusion pieces. So there's, to whatever degree that Congress, and there are several legislative pieces out of the House Financial Services in particular, that won't see the light of day as it relates to the president's desk, there's going to be a lot of urgency and pressure from the likes of the Chair Waters and even Senator Chair Brown, the Senate Banking Committee Chair. Those issues are of high priority. Obviously, there's also a lot of discussion around crypto, and I know we're going to talk about that, and the stablecoin community in particular. That's a lot of activity that is likely to take place in the House, but again, the likelihood of it seeing the president's desk is slim, so there's a lot of activity that will occur. And to the degree the administration vis-a-vis the SEC and the CFTC cannot necessarily create its own laws, and without congressional action unilaterally, you're likely to see enforcement or legislation, as they call it, legislated through enforcement. So
I'll just add 2 issues where I think there's a lot of overlap. We've already just talked about ESG, and in fact, the House passed a bill, a party line vote back in June, I think, 215 to 214, legislation that will require ESG disclosure by public companies. It's not going to be taken up in the Senate, so the action is obviously regulatory. The other is cyber, and certainly we've been talking at the conference a lot, and in fact, just this past Tuesday, really in response to Ukraine, the Senate passed what I think they call the Strengthening American Cybersecurity Act of 2022, long overdue legislation. And in fact, it was passed on what's called the consent calendar. So there was no one objected to it. That doesn't happen often. And it would require cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure, largely focused on energy and healthcare. I'm not sure mindset is included in critical infrastructure, but you're working on it. And it would also require federal agencies to report security incidents relating to cyber. So there's overlap in that area.
absolutely.
So why don't we turn now to delve more deeply into the regulatory realm. As you've heard, the SEC has just released a, pick your word, onslaught, wave, barrage, raft of regulations. We've now heard them all. They all have, you've heard this from me before, short comment deadlines on complex issues. They're all concurrent. 5 of them are due pretty much the same day. This is a heavy lift for all of us, and we encourage all of you to provide feedback. We've been speaking out about the comment periods. I know some of you may have seen that our General Counsel, Gail Bernstein, had an op-ed published in Investment News. We've requested an extension along with other trades for the private funds proposal. We'll continue to advocate there, but in the meantime, please get involved with us in our committees in preparing these comment letters. The proposals include cybersecurity, private funds, Form PF, beneficial ownership reporting, short sale reporting, T+1, and whistleblower. And that's not even any from the fall. There's more coming soon, as you heard, on ESG, sustainable investing, human capital. You've already heard at this conference about cyber and private funds. So in the spirit of being the cleanup crew, we'll start here with the beneficial ownership reporting. Rana, could you share a little bit about what the SEC is proposing and what some of our preliminary views are on the proposal?
Sure. So when we talk about beneficial ownership reporting, we're talking about your 13D and 13G filings, as everybody will recall. And as we know now, every rule proposal that comes out accompanies with a statement about some history, right? So this is the Williams Act, and you go back to 1968 until when they were first adopted. So there haven't been changes to these rules in a really long time. So we're talking about shortening the time frame to make these filings. Is there magic between 10 days and 5 days? And so that's really one of the questions that Commissioner Peirce made in a statement about shortening the filing deadlines on 13D and 13G from 10 to 5 days. So it's really about, remember what I said a couple minutes ago, transparency, speed of information in the marketplace. The Williams Act was really designed to figure out who controls a company. And so this is what these filings are for. They're to tell you when people take a large ownership position in a company, that could indicate control, right? So is there an indicia of control there? Well, then you wonder, well, then what is the rule proposal adding derivative instruments for? Because that's not necessarily indicia of control, but the rule proposal does that. And it also talks about amending what it means to act as a group, so acting in concert. What does that mean for passive versus active funds? So these are kind of the questions that will be answered under these new rules, but really unpacking, again, getting very tactical. What does that mean for the compliance professional who's making these filings? And is there magic in those 10 to 5 days? Maybe that information, you need a couple more days. I mean, we know what we're invested in. So those are the kind of questions. When you look at this proposal, in your 20 days, really think critically about the resources you need there. But that's the high level on beneficial ownership.
Right, and that is one to pay attention to because it's not just, even though it in some ways is aimed at activist investors, it also is very broad and affects reports by passive investors as well.
And it's all aimed at more transparency, but you have to get that balance right. Like transparency can also hurt when the conclusions are not clear. What are you trying to get at? And so that's what we really need to think about when we're talking about changing these kinds of reporting infrastructure.
Turning to T+1, strangely enough, at this point, that's all that's come out of the SEC's analysis of the GameStop Reddit situation last year. There was a lot of talk about payment for order flow and other rulemakings, but T+1 really is what's come out of it at this point. Ronna, what is the significance of the proposal and how does it affect the buy side?
Yeah, sure. So this one wasn't really a surprise, and then thankfully this one was unanimous, right? So industry and kind of commission support, those are the good news. Not as controversial. I think you can maybe 2017, the move T+3 to T+2, so maybe dust off that playbook and maybe make it not such a heavy, intense infrastructure lift. What's here, though, is what's underlying, the desire to maybe move to trade date, right? So T+0, and that will have more of an infrastructure move. So again, I think Gail noted in one of the earlier panels, really like unpacking what's in the rule and the shifts, because when you read the rule, you'll start to see, well, they're laying a groundwork for something else. So let's make sure when we make the comments, we're clear on what the other unintended impacts could be. So we know you're thinking about trade date. What does that mean? Let's go one day at a time, one step at a time on kind of shortening the settlement cycle. That's really the high level there too. When you look at the international marketplace, like right now, India is doing a phased approach to T+1. And so US is not leading here, so I think that's also helpful. And also universal support and the DTCC put out a white paper shortly after, which really gave a roadmap about how to do this by the compliance date by 2024. So there are some resources available, but this one, although it added to the other 10, right, makes it a lot, 10 being little bit of an exaggeration, but maybe not by the end of next week. But this one shouldn't be as controversial.
Right, the real, what we're really going to also focus in on is the comment about should we move to T+0, because that's obviously a much heavier lift and people are not ready at this point for that.
Not at all. Yeah.
The other SEC proposal that I don't think have talked about yet much at this conference is the proposal on whistleblower awards. It readdresses the whistleblower rules only a year after the commission reviewed and considered them. The proposal would basically give a whistleblower assurance that they could have the most lucrative award between the SEC's program and another agency's program if there were multiple. And it would also give the commission discretion to consider the dollar amount of an award only to increase the award and not to decrease it. Ronna, what is the impact here of the proposal on advisors in the enforcement program?
So yeah, not too much to add from what you said, but Karen obviously noted it's more lucrative to be a whistleblower, right? We can really say period there, you kind of get the message. But as it relates to the enforcement program, I think SEC staff members have been on the record saying the whistleblower program has been transformative, right? It helps them with their resources. And so how do you have that culture of compliance tone at the top to ensure people are reporting potential violations or if they're unsure to the compliance officers and the compliance team? How are you visible, especially now in the realm of distributed workforce, even more? And so those are the kinds of things that you want to think about. It was also on the exams panel earlier. I think Dabney was saying, with the JP Morgan case, you don't want to just have your policies and procedures on the shelf and kind of set there and forget it. Like, it needs to be dynamic. The compliance team needs to be front and center so people feel like they can report items, or just if they're unsure. New people in the business, the industry is evolving really quickly. You want to make sure the front line knows the rules, and that's something that just as advisors to the business we're constantly focused on. And so I think this is just highlighting that there's always more to the story there, and it's really important from a compliance team and perspective with your legal advisors as well to make sure that the business is informed, knows how to follow the rules, the laws, principles-based even, what your policies and procedures say. So that culture of compliance is really important here.
Thank you, Ronna. Why don't we turn now to climate change? This is an issue that crosses across all agencies in Congress. Why don't we start with Congress? Langston, how is climate change shaping up there? Will anything happen in Congress?
Maybe. It depends. That's the lawyer inside of me. But it really depends on the Build Back Better iteration. Again, there's about over $500 billion in, I believe, tax credits and climate addressing provisions that we are still being worked out with the likes of Senator Manchin and others. But that is the way that Democrats in the House and in the Senate find that they could address climate. Understanding that legislation that will come from the Financial Services or Senate Banking Committee that would impose at least transparency and reporting type of requirements on individual or investment by public issuers are not necessarily going to happen this year, and so, or within this Congress, so they will leave that to the regulators, which Gensler and others are doing what they need to do on that front. This will be more about providing tax incentives and credits to build out a more energy efficient, I would say, community atmosphere, but also, as Senator Manchin says, wants to address in some way, shape, or form the propping up to some degree the coal and oil industry. So there is, if anything is likely to come, there will be a balance between addressing the climate issues and also salvaging to what Senator Manchin would say, the coal and oil industry as well. So that's the balance that we're likely to see in Congress if it is to make its way to the president's desk, but otherwise, anything related to climate was likely to be, again, regulation and regulation by enforcement.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the House did pass an ESG bill, but it's a straight party line vote, and the ranking Republican in the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, who is retiring, is adamantly opposed to it, so that legislation isn't going anywhere.
So, Ronna, it sounds like the action's going to be at the regulators.
Yeah, there's no maybe over here. So with that, one of the things that you heard yesterday when, Karen, you were having your fireside chat with Commissioner Crenshaw, and these are more of the buzzwords kind of, is just when it comes to ESG and climate change, there's really generally support for consistent, comparable, reliable, or just beneficial information for investors to make informed decisions. So yeah, and then you hear about ESG every day, so you're like, oh, if that's just the statement that we're gonna go with, what else is going on? There's just so much noise in this space. I was reading recently that one advisor commented, and nothing against our vendor friends here, but 150 vendors who can help you with ESG metrics or ESG monitoring, and we don't even know what it means yet, right, from a regulation perspective. And so that's a really challenging environment to try to develop rules in. And so that's one of the areas where we know rulemaking is happening, but we know the SEC is still acting right now. So we heard about the ESG task force. We know that exams are highlighting things. We heard about a case where you're not doing what you said you were going to do. That theme continues to pop up. Know what your policies and procedures say. If you're saying you're investing a certain type of way, whether that's leveraging what you define as ESG, you need to be doing that. We know FINRA is making comments on marketing materials and saying, okay, well, you say you do this. Is it in your registration statement for a fund, for example? So I think with that as like a backdrop, we know the rulemaking is going to focus on human capital disclosures. We know there will be climate change disclosures, corporate board disclosure, and then rules specific for investment advisors, investment companies, and issuers. So it's a big ESG umbrella, right? And it will cover all of those topics. And this is not new, though, and so I think Chair Gensler said in one of his statements, investors are asking this, so that's why it's important to the regulators. And so as long as investors are continuing to ask for more information about the companies in which they invest, that's how executive comp came about. I mean, it's there now, we don't challenge it, but that wasn't always. And so I think we'll see more of that. And I can kind of discuss human capital disclosures, but that's really the kind of big umbrella of ESG. And I thought it would come out maybe this week, so I was a little nervous about that before I came up here to speak to. Like, one more thing to add.
Right, we were hearing that it might come out this week, but not yet. Not yet.
Well, we never know the 3 hours and 40 minutes for it to come out.
Right.
Europe is already ahead here. How do you see the interplay between the EU rules and what the SEC is anticipating?
Sure. So this is something that a lot of you are dealing with right now when you think about SFDR and Article 6, Article 8, Article 9. You have clients already asking you, are you going to be thinking about integration, impact, considerations? And so how do you take that framework, match it up with rulemaking that's evolving, or maybe you got a comment already from an exam or FINRA marketing material review? How do you kind of put all of that together and design a platform? But it's about knowing your business, knowing the client preferences, and then continuing to go back to the overarching goal of all this. You're a fiduciary and a steward for your client's capital. And so how does your client want you to invest their money, and how are you managing pursuant to the rules that govern your business? But the interplay is another strain on resources, because it does indirectly, if not directly, impact our business.
We've heard a lot about what the SEC might come out with on climate change, whether it's level 1, level 2, level 3, whether it's fund names. What do we expect with respect to the human capital proposal?
Sure. So one of the titles that Karen didn't mention in the beginning of mine is I'm serving as my company's interim head of HR. So when I think about the metrics for human capital, this is company-specific stuff. And so it's about the qualitative and the quantitative. And so you can say, these metrics are important for company culture. How do you assess culture? Boards are asking about culture because that ties to sustainability. And so the things that you look at qualitative, I invest, we have a talent management program for our employees, therefore our employees are being upskilled. Quantitative, what's your workforce turnover look like? How much did you invest in talent development programs? All this can kind of be put on a dashboard. What's your compensation framework? How do you benchmark your compensation? How do you know your compensation is better than your peer or adequate? What's your workforce diversity? How do you think about health and safety? Those are the kinds of things that will be in the human capital disclosures, and investors are asking about it already. So I don't think we should be surprised if we see that kind of information coming from a human capital perspective.
I would also note that the SEC is not the only game in town on this, and the Department of Labor actually just issued a request for comment on climate risk in retirement plans.
Yeah.
So that recently came out, and it is a cross-agency effort. Why don't we turn now to private funds, including Form PF. There have been obviously a lot of discussions here at the conference over the last day and a half, and you already know what the proposals are about. But I'd like to ask you, Rana, what you think about the SEC's rationale for changing from a principles-based approach to prohibiting certain activities and contractual provisions.
So Karen, I think you might want to talk about some of this too, because it's foundational. This one is really a game changer, and I think Commissioner Pearson, a public statement, said a sea change, right? So when you look at this, here's a product, in most instances, exempt from a prescriptive regulatory regime, now being taken, kind of out of that principles base. This is a really big change. For a private fund only friends, if you don't have a mutual fund friend, you may want to ask them about how to frame your comments here, because this is one where partnering with the IAA, it will be really important. This deadline, I believe the IAA is going to try to push back on. 30 days is not sufficient to look at this. You look at any law firm alert, they all start with in a sweeping change. Sweeping means there's a lot there, and there's stuff in there that you might not even think the title suggests. So I think the title is something like documentation, and then it goes into like all of these changes. So when we talk kind of as an IAA, so this is in that capacity, talking to Gail and others, just continuing to be concerned about a flat ban on certain practices. Consistent, fair, disclosure, consent is a theme that has always worked for advisors, so why the shift? I know they're welcoming comments, but this one is one that's kind of changing the landscape that private funds have always invested, how they've managed money. And so there's things like quarterly statement changes, fairness opinions, and audits, but I think it's just even bigger than that. So really spending the time to digest this rule and understand the impact, and that's the Form PF part aside, but that principle-based approach, that change is fundamental. I know you have to want to add there.
Right. I mean, once the overarching fiduciary duty in the Principles-Based Advisors Act has worked well, and once you start focusing on specific activities and contractual terms, you risk playing whack-a-mole, right? The activity moves somewhere else. Whereas if you are coming at and you risk reducing everything to a checklist instead of a holistic view of your compliance program and your ethical framework and your culture. You don't want to negatively impact the overarching fiduciary culture that firms have by really narrowing down into specific little areas. And once you do that, it's I hate to use the legal slippery slope, but that could cascade into other areas, and that really would not be a benefit to either advisors or their clients.
Yeah, so the implications there are just extremely vast. Spend the time on this rule and really figure out how it impacts your business. The comment letters here will be incredibly important.
Rana, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and as you discussed with Commissioner Crenshaw yesterday morning, this is quite a shift for the SEC. Moving away from retail investors to more sophisticated investors, institutional investors, and she made very clear that's part of the SEC's mission too. But there is a real question, I think, of prioritization.
Change in focus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Rana, how does the Form PF proposal relate to this overall?
Sure, so Form PF becomes more dynamic, real-time reporting, which I'm sure just made you all really love your lunch and want that dessert right away. So the compliance resources to real-time reporting, you're making a form now that was quarterly, annual, there's these 9, I think, triggering events, fast-moving events. Those are things that if you think about a mutual fund, for example, pretty prescriptive in your fundamentals, thou shalt not do this with respect to concentration or something like that. And you have that with a private fund structure, but this would be very different to have to report that information to the SEC in real time. I think it's a one-day turnaround. Those are real time frames. And I know it can be the abstract when you're looking at a piece of paper and a rule, but when you're sitting there on your desk and learning about these things, and then you have to fill out a form, and then you're also thinking about what impact is this fast-moving event actually having on my business and my client, and client being the first priority. It's again back to that resource constraint and real-time reporting. This is a big shift.
And they've thrown a lot into this, into these proposals. As I mentioned yesterday, in the Form PF proposal, they proposed to define digital assets. I mean, that's a really big deal. And in the private fund proposal, they actually threw in a requirement that would apply to all advisors, not just private fund advisors, and that is to document your annual compliance review, your compliance program review. I think that's a best practice already.
Yeah.
And many people are already doing that. But it's just, again, you have to read all of these very carefully, because what you think the title of the proposal is, there are a lot of items in there that affect beyond private funds.
For sure.
We have I'd like to leave a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, sure. We have gotten some good questions from the audience. The first is, how does Ukraine affect kind of the congressional schedule over the next few months?
Langston, you want to?
In a big way, in a very big way. I mean, starting with sanction activity that's been, frankly, increasing over the course of this week. There are a lot of discussions at the leadership level to look at other avenues through congressional, where there is congressional action, to influence what happens there. The likelihood that they can do that is still up in the air. There is likely to be, aside from the sanctions, emergency supplemental to address and provide help to Ukraine. And that's something that's being discussed within the Senate and the White House right now, and congressional leaders. They got the four corners, if you will. That is a bipartisan measure that we can see moving forward. They're still deciding on a few different issues within it, but we can see that moving forward pretty quickly in short order. But it does push back a lot of activity that would have otherwise been involved. And so, but there will be a lot more activity, and it really depends on what happens over the next week. I would say next week or so, but it seems like 2 hours in that area can be a week. So it really just depends on what happens and how much influence the White House will ask for Congress to provide. And whatever, at this point, I think he's pretty much got an open wallet from Congress to be helpful, and that's in a bipartisan way.
Great. Yeah, and on a related question, just because of the administration's focus on ESG, how do you see the Ukraine situation impacting it, just based on the potential development of fossil fuels domestically, so they don't have to rely on that foreign oil?
You want to take that question?
Rana, you want that one?
No, I know.
This is for anybody on stage. I didn't call on anybody.
No. Chew, walk, gum, and chew. I mean, they want to do both. They will continue to do both. And because the ESG compliance issues are on the agency level, and there's an SEC focus specifically, among other agencies, that is a focus that they can continue to work on. And that is, the ball is already rolling in that front. So they don't necessarily need to, it won't be halted by the activity coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Congress as it relates to Ukraine. I think as it relates to Ukraine, these issues are going to take the forefront, for sure, in Congress and within the White House. But as it relates to SEC, believe that they'll continue along their path. And to the degree that sanction issues become, a concern for them, they can get moving, but it won't necessarily stop some of the proposals that they are releasing and have released. A lot of it's been written.
Oh, for sure.
And there are other things that are long overdue. There's a backlog of nominations, including nominations of the CFTC, and so there's a lot of just routine stuff that Congress has to get to before they can take up some of these new initiatives.
Yeah.
Got it. Next question. What are the chances for the return of an increased capital gains tax on the wealthy, and also a billionaire's tax?
Langston, do you want to start?
I'd like to say that there is a below 50% chance, below 30% chance that it comes back, but that is something, the capital gains tax, that Senator Manchin has put forward as he would like to include as far as a tax package if they were to move forward with the reiterated version or the Build Back Better version, so a new version. So we can't say it's off the table here in DC, but it's a slim likelihood just because of the fact that it was pulled off the table before, and that includes the billionaires tax. But in addition to that, there are some very prominent involved senators that do not want to see it back on the table, including the likes of Senator Sinema and others. So it's a very low chance, but it's not off the table, either of them.
Okay, and another one, is the IA going to take a position on title protection? So for instance, the XYPN lawsuit with relation to the financial planner title.
Right, well, so we have talked about this issue a lot. I think the question was, as I interpret it, the use of the word investment advisor, financial advisor, holding out as an advisor in your title. And we have been on the record as saying there's a lot of confusion out there by the time, with regard to the titles. In the Reg BI standard of conduct package, the SEC did prohibit reps from using the title investment advisor if they were only registered as a registered representative, but they're still allowed to use the title if they are registered as both. We wanted the SEC to go further, and we also wanted the SEC to strengthen the solely incidental interpretation of when you are providing investment advice solely incidental to brokerage. I know the SEC has a very full agenda. It doesn't seem likely that they're going to take it back up now, but the confusion caused by the titles and the way folks hold themselves out is something that we care deeply about, and we are continually engaged with the SEC and staff on that.
But it certainly does look unlikely that we're going to see more rulemaking, that BI is going to be reopened. I think we might see some guidance down the road. I think it's going to be fleshed out through enforcement, and stay tuned. I think that's where the action will be.
Right, we're going to see more enforcement. We're going to see the SEC trying to leverage all the tools that they currently have with the standard of conduct rulemaking, and see whether that is sufficient and do an analysis there. We also are on record of saying the SEC should conduct investor testing of Form CRS to see whether it is working as intended and whether the readers of Form CRS actually are, whether confusion has been clarified by Form CRS or exacerbated. I hear from the audience that there is still confusion, and I'm not surprised by that.
Great.
I have one more question, final question. Digital assets has gotten a lot of play, cryptocurrencies, it's been a hot topic. Langston, what do you see as the key issues being discussed on Capitol Hill? Any bills that have legs here?
There are several bills, and I would say, short answer, a lot of regulatory activity by enforcement, and has been and will continue to be. On Capitol Hill, there are several bills that are likely to come out or have come out and will likely come out to address stablecoin. The stablecoins specifically, but broader as well. The House Financial Services Committee, we're anticipating a large comprehensive bill that will address not just stablecoins, but also central bank, digital currency, definitions, which tend to be, depending on who you speak to, a little unclear. SEC versus the CFTC, who has, the jurisdiction and definitions of different security, whether something crypto is a security or a digital asset. So they're looking to define all of that, and they're working with the SEC as well as the CFTC as well. So that's likely to come out. Likelihood of it making to the president's desk this year, considering everything that we've discussed this year up here, very unlikely. What the Democrats are looking to do is lay the groundwork for more activity in this front next year. So that's what's happening, but you can expect a lot to happen on the regulatory space.
I think on the theme of this is a hot topic, but with everything else that's going on, it's just not going to be at the forefront right now. There was a request for comment, not a rule proposal, so that was good, right? Request for comment on digital engagement practices, but I think the theme here is also to make sure there is real understanding about how advisors use these technologies, what's important to advisors, and the SEC being balanced on that and technology neutral, and really just saying that advisor who uses this platform, just as a fundamental matter, isn't any different or better than advisor who uses this platform, so technology neutral. But again, hot topic, probably not at the forefront.
Absolutely right. One other point I'll make is that the White House will be releasing this longstanding executive order that was supposed to bring into all the different agencies that interagency collaboration, AML issues that are broader than financial services and issues that they wanted Department of State and the likelihood. So it's coming, depending on when, to some people yesterday and next week, but we'll wait for it to come out. But it will likely not have anything hard pressing, but likely just define principles of how the different agencies will collaborate moving forward.
Neil, how can folks get involved in all these important issues?
Will everybody please take out a pen or pencil or get on your laptop right now, go to June 9th and block out Advisor Advocacy Day. Not yet clear, we'll make a decision shortly whether it's going to be in person or virtual. There's some complications on Capitol Hill, less related to COVID and more related to January 6th, but that's going to be a critical event. And given the timing of what we're all discussing, boy, it's going to be a great time to be in touch with Congress. So number one, advisor advocacy. Number two, take action now. You get these emails from us periodically asking you to go to the Take Action Now feature of our website. It will literally take 2 or 3 minutes to send a letter to your elected representatives, your 2 senators and your member of the House. We put up a template letter. You can revise it however you want, but please respond to that. It does make a difference. I need grassroots advocacy so the message that Langston and I deliver on your behalf resonates. So please be responsive. June 9th, take action now.
Thank you, Neil. And from the regulatory standpoint, get involved with our committees and work streams. We have specific work streams for the comment letters. Talk to any one of us. Thank you. Please join me in thanking this expert panel. We've covered a lot of ground today and appreciate your support.